The air in the St. Ignatius Cathedral was thick with the scent of 1,000 white roses and old money. Nathaniel Caldwell, a man who had built an empire on charm and ruthless ambition, stood at the altar, his gaze fixed on his bride. But as the priest uttered the timeless words, "Speak now or forever, hold your peace," the colossal oak doors at the back of the nave groaned open. Every head turned. It wasn't a late-arriving guest. It was a vision in crimson. A woman, her face, a mask of serene fury, stood silhouetted against the light. She wore a red dress the color of spilled wine, and revenge, a stark rebellion in a sea of pastels. And as she began her slow, deliberate walk down the aisle, the man at the altar turned white as a ghost. He knew that woman. She was the past he had buried, the secret he thought was erased. She was his wife. Aria Caldwell had always been a woman of muted tones. Her wardrobe consisted of beige, soft grey, and gentle blues colours that allowed her to blend into the background, to be the supportive, unseen foundation upon which her husband, Nathaniel, built his meteoric rise. For 12 years, she had been his quiet collaborator, his late-night editor, his unpaid strategist. She'd managed their modest home with the same meticulous care she used to manage his calendar, his social obligations, and his fragile ego. She was the scaffolding, and he was the skyscraper. Everyone admired the skyscraper, but no one ever looked at the scaffolding. Their life had changed 5 years ago when Nate's software company, Innovate Dynamics, secured a revolutionary patent for a logistics algorithm, an algorithm that Aria had conceptualized on a cocktail napkin during a sleepless night, a spark of genius she had gifted him freely. Overnight, they went from comfortable to astronomically wealthy. But the money didn't bring them closer. It created a chasm. Nate started spending more time at board meetings, his bespoke suits smelling of a perfume that wasn't hers. His calls became shorter, his touch perfunctory. He told her he needed space. He'd rented a penthouse. Downtown, he explained, to be closer to the office to focus on a crucial merger. "It's just for a few months, darling," he'd said, his voice as smooth and convincing as ever. "For us. For our future." The months stretched into a year. Aria lived in their sprawling suburban house, a gilded cage filled with memories that were starting to feel like they belonged to someone else. She was Mrs. Caldwell, a name with immense social currency, yet she felt invisible. The joint bank account was always full, a silent transactional apology for his absence. The end didn't come with a dramatic confrontation, but with a whisper, a piece of thick, cream-colored cardstock delivered to the wrong address. It was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Nathaniel Caldwell. But the courier had mistakenly brought it to the old suburban house instead of the downtown penthouse. Aria's hands trembled as she saw the elegant calligraphy. It was an invitation to the wedding of Mr. Nathaniel Caldwell and Ms. Brooke Langford. The date was in 3 weeks, the venue St. Ignatius Cathedral, followed by a reception at the opulent Oakhaven estate. Brooke Langford. Aria knew the name. She was the daughter of Robert Langford, the titan of industry whose company was orchestrating the merger with Innovate Dynamics. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The late nights, the merger meetings, the penthouse. It wasn't about business, it was an audition, and Nate had gotten the part. Aria sank to the floor, the invitation clutched in her hand. The world tilted, the air sucked from her lungs. 12 years. She had poured 12 years of her life, her intellect, and her love into this man, and he was erasing her as if she were a rough draft of a document. She wasn't just being replaced, she was being overwritten. She pulled up a popular society blog on her tablet, her fingers numb. There they were smiling for the cameras at a charity gala. Nate looking dashing and powerful, and Brooke young blonde, and gleaming with the easy confidence of inherited wealth. The caption read, "Tech mogul Nathaniel Caldwell and his beautiful fiancée, Brooke Langford, set to tie the knot in what's being called the wedding of the year." Fiancé. The word was a physical blow. How could he be engaged? They were still married. Weren't they? A frantic search through her files yielded nothing. No legal papers, no emails, no hint of a divorce. She called Nate's personal assistant, a young woman who always sounded both terrified and starstruck. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Caldwell," the assistant stammered. "Mr. Caldwell instructed me that all communication should go through his lawyer. He said you'd understand." His lawyer. The cold formality of it was more brutal than any shouting match could have been. In that moment, something inside Arya shifted. The grief, the shock, it didn't disappear, but it began to crystallize. It hardened from a liquid sorrow into a diamond-sharp point of rage. He thought she was a ghost, a relic of a past life he could simply discard. He thought she would fade away in her beige and grey world. He was wrong. A fire she didn't know she possessed began to smoulder. If he wanted to erase her, she would make sure her existence was the one thing no one in that church or in this city would ever forget. She looked at her reflection in the dark screen of the tablet, a pale, tear-streaked face. It was the face of a victim. That was the last time she would ever see it. The first few days were a blur of numb disbelief. Arya barely ate, wandering through the silent, oversized house that now felt like a mausoleum for a life that had never truly been hers. She contacted a handful of divorce attorneys, but the story was always the same. They would hear the name Nathaniel Caldwell. Their demeanor would shift from sympathetic to cautious, and they'd quote her retainer fees that were clearly designed to make her go away. They were afraid of him, of his power, of his influence. She was David, and he was a Goliath, surrounded by a phalanx of the most expensive lawyers in the country. One rainy afternoon, sitting in her study, surrounded by books on art history, her abandoned passion, her mind drifted back. She thought about moments she had felt truly seen, and her memory snagged on an incident from 2 years prior. It was a stormy night, much like this one. She was driving home from a rare solo gallery visit when she saw a vintage Bentley stranded on the side of a deserted country road, steam billowing from its hood. An elderly man in a simple but well-made tweed coat was struggling with the tire iron, looking frustrated and frail. Arya, ever the caregiver, pulled over. She spent the next hour in the rain on her knees on the wet asphalt, using the know-how her mechanic father had taught her to change the tire. The man was flustered, grateful, and deeply impressed. He'd offered her money, which she refused. He'd asked for her name. "Arya," she'd simply said. He introduced himself only as Desmond. He insisted on taking her business card, the one she'd had printed years ago for a freelance art consulting business she'd never had the time to launch. "One good turn deserves another, my dear Arya," he'd said, his eyes sharp and intelligent. "You never know when you might need a friend." She'd forgotten all about it. Desperate with nothing to lose, she found the old card in her desk drawer. On the back he had scribbled a private number. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was insane. Calling a stranger she'd helped 2 years ago. But the alternative was to do nothing to let Nate win. She dialed the number. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Pierce private line." "Hello," Arya stammered. I'm looking for a man named Desmond. I met him a couple of years ago. He had car trouble." There was a pause. "May I ask who is calling?" "My name is Arya Caldwell." The silence on the other end was profound. "Then one moment, Mrs. Caldwell." A minute later, A familiar, gravelly voice came on the line. "Arya, I remember you. The angel in the rain with the tire iron. I must admit, I didn't expect to hear from you. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Tears welled in her eyes, a mix of relief and desperation. The whole story tumbled out. The 12 years of sacrifice, the stolen algorithm idea, the secret fiancé, the wedding invitation, the lawyers who wouldn't touch her case. She spoke for 10 minutes, straight, expecting him to interrupt, to dismiss her as a hysterical woman. He listened without a single interruption. When she finished, the only sound was her own ragged breathing. "Nathaniel Caldwell." Desmond said, his voice, now devoid of its earlier warmth, replaced by a chillingly cold tone. "Innovate Dynamics. I know him. And I know his prospective father-in-law, Robert Langford. They are not good men, Arya." He paused. "My full name is Desmond Pierce." The name hit Arya like a physical force. Desmond Pierce wasn't just some rich old man. He was the Desmond Pierce. A reclusive, semi-retired corporate raider known as the Shark of Wall Street. A man who had built and dismantled Fortune 500 companies with surgical precision. He was a billionaire many times over, a legend whispered about in boardrooms with a mixture of terror and awe. He hadn't been seen publicly in years. "Mr. Pierce," she whispered, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," he said, a hint of a smile in his voice. "That was the point. Arya, I don't believe in charity, but I do believe in paying my debts. You helped me when I was vulnerable with no expectation of reward. That is a quality I find exceedingly rare. This indignity that has been visited upon you, I consider it a personal affront." He continued, his voice taking on the decisive, commanding tone that had terrified CEOs for decades. "You will not be needing a small-time divorce attorney, Arya. You require a different kind of weapon. My personal legal team is at your disposal. They are not divorce lawyers. They are sharks just like me. They dismantle corporations and hostile takeovers for breakfast. Dismantling your husband's life will be a light afternoon snack." A car, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows, would be at her house in 1 hour to bring her to his private offices downtown. And Arya, he said just before hanging up, start thinking about what you truly want, not just half of his assets, everything. Think bigger. An hour later, as she was driven through the city in silent, leather-upholstered luxury, Arya felt a terrifying, exhilarating surge of hope. She wasn't just going to get a lawyer. She was getting an army. The muted tones of her old life were already beginning to fade, replaced by the promise of a vibrant, furious red. The offices of Pierce Holdings were not on any public directory. They occupied the top 3 floors of a discreet skyscraper overlooking the city, a minimalist sanctuary of steel glass and priceless modern art. Arya, feeling out of place in her sensible grey dress, was escorted directly to a conference room with a panoramic view. Desmond Pierce was there looking exactly as she remembered, but his simple tweed jacket was replaced by an impeccably tailored suit. With him was a woman who commanded the room with her presence alone. She was tall with sharp features, hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that seemed to analyze and assess everything with unnerving speed. "Arya, this is Jessica Sloan," Desmond said. "She is the head of my legal counsel. You can think of her as your new best friend and your husband's worst nightmare." Jessica Sloan did not smile. She extended a hand, her grip firm and brief. "Mrs. Caldwell, I've been briefed. Let's get to work. We have less than 3 weeks." What followed was not a therapy session. It was an interrogation, a deposition, and a strategy meeting all in one. Jessica and her team of 3 other lawyers, young, hungry, and radiating an intimidating intelligence, drew out every detail of Arya's 12-year marriage. They weren't interested in her feelings of betrayal. They were interested in facts, dates, and evidence. The algorithm, Jessica said, her pen tapping a rhythm on her legal pad. You said you conceptualized it. Can you prove it? Arya's heart sank. It was on a napkin years ago. We were celebrating an anniversary at a small Italian restaurant. I was explaining how shipping routes could be optimized using predictive analytics. He just took the napkin and said, "Let me see that." I never saw it again. One of the younger lawyers, a tech specialist named Ben, leaned forward. A napkin can be evidence. What was the name of the restaurant? La Stella, Arya replied. It closed down a few years ago. For the next 2 weeks, Arya's life became a whirlwind of activity. Jessica's team worked with an efficiency that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. They dispatched private investigators who were ghosts digging into every facet of Nate's life. They subpoenaed records Arya never knew existed. Ben the tech whiz managed to track down the son of the owner of La Stella. He still had his father's old reservation books, and tucked inside the book for that specific year, used as a bookmark, was a faded cocktail napkin covered in Arya's familiar handwriting and complex diagrams. It was time-stamped by the reservation, 1,000,000-to-1 shot that had just paid out. The next discovery was even more explosive. The legal team looking for divorce filings in their state found nothing. But expanding their search, they found it a divorce decree finalized a year ago, filed in a small, obscure county in Nevada, known for its quick, no-fuss dissolutions. Arya's signature was on the documents. "I have never been to Nevada in my life," Arya said, staring at the scanned document on the screen. The signature was a near-perfect forgery, but it wasn't hers. Jessica Sloane's face showed the first flicker of emotion Arya had seen, a predatory smile. "He didn't just leave you," she said, her voice a low paw. "He committed federal wire fraud and forgery to illegally terminate a marriage. He didn't divorce you, Mrs. Caldwell. He faked it, which means in the eyes of the law, you are still very much his wife. And his marriage to Brooke Langford will be bigamy." The final piece of the puzzle was the most devastating and the most powerful. The investigators uncovered a trail of shell corporations and offshore accounts. Nate hadn't just used Arya's idea. He had been systematically siphoning funds from Innovate Dynamics, hiding assets in preparation for his new life, cheating not only Arya, but also his business partners, including his future father-in-law. During this time, Arya was also undergoing her own transformation. Desmond took a personal interest in her. He wasn't just her benefactor. He became her mentor. He made you feel small so you would never realize your own strength, Desmond told her during one of their meetings in his art-filled office. "Power isn't about shouting, Arya. It's about knowing exactly where to apply pressure. Your mind created that algorithm. That same mind is your greatest weapon. Stop thinking like a wife. Start thinking like a CAO." He hired tutors for her, experts in corporate finance, contract law, and public speaking. Her days were filled with learning, absorbing information at a dizzying pace. The fog of grief was replaced by the clarity of purpose. She wasn't just getting revenge. She was reclaiming her life and her legacy. The plan was set. They could have filed lawsuits, served papers, and let it all play out in the sterile confines of a courtroom over years. But Desmond and Jessica understood that for Nate, public image was everything. A private defeat was not enough. The humiliation had to be total, the fall from grace, absolute. "He built his stage," Jessica said, presenting the final plan. "We're just going to rewrite the final act." The day before the wedding, Jessica took Arya to a private atelier. Desmond insisted, she said, gesturing to a dress hanging in the center of the room. It was a gown of pure crimson silk. It was bold, elegant, and utterly unapologetic. It was everything Arya had never allowed herself to be. As she looked at her reflection in the mirror, wearing the dress, she saw not the ghost of Mrs. Caldwell, but the resurrection of Arya, a woman who had been forged in the fires of betrayal and was about to walk out of the flames. Nathaniel Caldwell felt like a king surveying his domain. From the balcony of his penthouse, the city lights glittered below him like a carpet of diamonds. In his hand was a glass of Macallan 50, a gift from his future father-in-law, Robert Langford. Everything was perfect. Almost too perfect. Brooke was at the Oakhaven estate, overseeing the final preparations for the reception. He'd spoken to her an hour ago. She'd been giddy talking about the ice sculptures and the string quartet he'd flown in from Vienna. She was exactly what he needed, beautiful, well-connected, and delightfully uncomplicated. She didn't challenge him, didn't question his late nights, didn't have ideas about his business. She was a prize, a perfect accessory to the life he had built. His thoughts, unbidden, drifted to Arya. He felt a fleeting, annoying prickle of something that might have been guilt, but he quickly smothered it. It was for the best. She was a relic of his former life, the life of struggle and ambition. She belonged in that quiet suburban house with her books and her gentle sadness. The Nevada divorce had been a stroke of genius, clean, quiet, and untraceable. He'd paid a hefty sum to a shady lawyer to get it done, ensuring the documents were backdated and buried. Arya would never even know where to look. By the time she figured it out, he and Brooke would be on their honeymoon, and any protest she made would sound like the ravings of a bitter ex-wife. He'd provided for her, he told himself. The house was paid off, and he'd set up a trust that would deposit a generous but not exorbitant sum into her account every month. It was severance pay for 12 years of service. More than fair. His phone buzzed. It was his head of security. "Mr. Caldwell, sir. Just a heads up. We had a process server try to gain access to the building earlier. Asked for you." Nate's grip tightened on his glass. "Did he say what it was about?" "No, sir. Standard procedure, we didn't accept anything and sent him on his way. Probably just another nuisance suit from a competitor." "Nothing to worry about. We've doubled security at the cathedral and the estate for tomorrow, just as you asked." "Good," Nate said, his voice tight. A nuisance suit. That's all it was. Still, it left him with a sour taste in his mouth. He looked at the city again, trying to recapture the feeling of triumph. He was Nathaniel Caldwell. He was untouchable. Tomorrow he would cement his dynasty by marrying Brooke Langford, effectively merging his company's innovation with her father's established power. He was on the cusp of everything he had ever wanted. Meanwhile, in a suite at the Four Seasons, under the name Jessica Sloane, Arya was experiencing a different kind of Eve. The crimson dress hung on a mannequin in the corner, seeming to pulse with a life of its own. She wasn't nervous. She was strangely calm, a feeling of absolute certainty settling over her. Jessica and Ben were running through the final checklist. Process server was turned away as expected, Ben reported, looking up from his laptop. He made a show of it, ensuring the security logs would reflect an attempted service of a summons. Establishes a paper trail that Nate actively avoided contact. "Media contacts are in place," Jessica said. "Reporters from the Wall Street Journal and Forbes are confirmed guests courtesy of a few invitations we acquired. They think they're covering a society wedding. They're about to get the business story of the decade." "The Langford file?" Arya asked, her voice steady. "Delivered to Robert Langford's hotel suite an hour ago," Jessica confirmed. an anonymous tip, a dossier detailing your husband's offshore accounts and the money he's been embezzling from Innovate Dynamics. We timed it, so he'll have just enough time to read it and verify some of it, but not enough time to stop the wedding. He'll be sitting in that front pew, wondering if his future son-in-law is a genius or a criminal. Arya nodded. It was a cruel, brilliant move. It would plant a seed of doubt that would fester throughout the ceremony. Desmond Pierce arrived shortly after, not with legal documents, but with a small velvet box. "For tomorrow," he said, opening it. Inside was a simple but stunning necklace, a single flawless ruby hanging from a platinum chain. "The color of victory, my dear." He looked at her, his sharp eyes softening for a moment. "Are you ready?" Arya looked from Desmond's knowing gaze to Jessica's confident smirk, to the crimson dress waiting for her. She thought of the 12 years she had spent in the shadows, her voice a whisper, her presence an afterthought. She thought of the man in the penthouse toasting a future built on her erasure. "I'm not the woman he married anymore," Arya said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "And I'm not the woman he divorced. He has no idea who is coming for him tomorrow." The St. Ignatius Cathedral was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, its vaulted ceilings echoing with the hushed whispers of the city's elite. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, painting the marble floors in jewels of light. Nathaniel Caldwell stood at the altar, a portrait of success. His tuxedo was Tom Ford, his smile was practiced, and his confidence was absolute. Beside him, his best man, his equally slick COO, gave him a reassuring nod. In the front pew, Robert Langford sat stiffly, his face unreadable. He'd received the anonymous package last night, and the contents had churned his stomach. Financial charts, bank transfers, a web of deceit. He'd made a few discreet calls this morning. The initial findings were disturbing. But he couldn't make a scene. Not now. He would let the wedding proceed and deal with Caldwell later, privately and ruthlessly. The organ swelled and the congregation rose. Brooke Langford began her procession down the aisle on her father's arm. She was radiant in a cloud of white lace and diamonds, her eyes locked on Nate. To the guests, it was a fairy tale. Nate watched her approach, the perfect culmination of his grand design. He caught Robert Langford's eye and gave a subtle nod which was met with a glacial stare. Nate brushed it off as pre-wedding jitters. They met at the altar, hands joined. The priest, an old man with a gentle voice, began the ceremony. The traditional rites unfolded the familiar words, washing over the opulent crowd. Arya had timed her arrival to the second. She waited in the vestibule with Jessica Ben and 2 other stone-faced lawyers from Pierce Holdings, listening to the muffled sounds of the ceremony. She could feel the thrum of her own heart, a steady, powerful beat. Inside, the priest reached the pivotal moment. "If anyone present knows any reason why these 2 should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever. Hold their peace." A polite, expectant silence filled the cathedral. This was the moment. With a deep, resonant groan that silenced the organ, the great oak doors at the back of the cathedral swung inward. Every head swiveled. The guests gasped, a collective intake of breath that was almost a hiss. There stood Arya. The sunlight framed her, turning the crimson of her dress into a fiery aura. The ruby at her throat seemed to capture all the light in the room. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, her makeup was flawless, and her expression was one of unbreakable composure. She was not a scorned woman. She was a queen arriving to reclaim her throne. She took her first step down the aisle. Her heels clicked on the marble, the sound sharp and deliberate, a metronome counting down the seconds of Nate's life. Murmurs erupted through the pews. "Who is that? Is that his first wife?" I thought they divorced years ago. Nate's face had gone from smug satisfaction to ashen horror. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked like he had seen a ghost who had decided to wear blood red to a haunting. Brooke turned her beautiful face, contorting in confusion and then dawning fury. "Nate, who is that? What is going on?" Arya continued her slow, purposeful walk. She wasn't looking at the shocked guests. Her eyes were locked on one person, the man at the altar. Her gaze was not filled with hate or even sadness. It was cold, clear, and filled with an immense, terrifying power. It was the look of a predator that had finally cornered its prey. She stopped about 20 feet from the altar, creating a perfect triangle of tension between herself, Nate, and his would-be bride. The silence in the cathedral was now absolute, thick with an unbearable sense of anticipation. "Nate," Arya said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the vaulted space. It wasn't a shout, but it commanded complete attention. "You seem to have forgotten something, or rather, someone." Nate finally found his voice, a strangled whisper. "Arya, what are you doing here? You can't be here." "Oh, I can," she replied, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "And I am. You see, there seems to be a slight legal impediment to this ceremony." She turned her head slightly, gesturing towards the back of the church. "My lawyers would be happy to explain." On cue, Jessica Sloane, flanked by her team, stepped forward from the doors. They moved with the synchronized, intimidating grace of a wolf pack. Jessica held a leather-bound folio. The grand romantic wedding had just become a courtroom, and judgment was about to be served. The sight of Jessica Sloane and her team, dressed in severe dark suits that contrasted sharply with the wedding's festive attire, sent a fresh wave of shock through the cathedral. They weren't wedding crashers. They looked like executioners. "What is the meaning of this?" Robert Langford finally boomed, rising from his pew, his face a thunderous mask of rage. "Security, remove these people." Two burly security guards hired for the event started to move forward from the sides of the nave. Jessica held up a hand, a gesture so commanding that they actually stopped. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Unless you want to add obstruction of justice to the list of charges your employer is about to face." She took a few more steps forward, her eyes fixed on the priest. "Apologies for the interruption, Father. My name is Jessica Sloane. I am legal counsel for Mrs. Arya Caldwell." She emphasized the Mrs., letting the word hang in the air. Nate finally spurred into action, by sheer panic, stepped forward. "This is a private matter, Arya. We can discuss this later. Don't do this." "We're long past later, Nate," Arya said coolly. "This woman is my client's delusional ex-wife, Nate's best man and COO, a man named Gavin interjected, trying to control the narrative. "She's clearly unstable." Jessica's lips curved into a smile that was all teeth. "Ex-wife, that's a fascinating term, because to be an ex-wife, one must first be legally divorced." She opened the folio she was carrying. "And that right there is the problem." She turned so the front pews and, more importantly, Robert Langford could see. "This is a divorce decree filed in Clark County, Nevada, a year and a half ago. It bears what purports to be my client's signature, dissolving her marriage to Mr. Caldwell." She paused, letting the statement sink in. Nate's face was slick with sweat. He knew what was coming. "The thing about signatures," Jessica continued, her voice dripping with contempt, "is that they can be forged. we have retained 3 of the country's leading forensic handwriting analysts. All 3 have certified under penalty of perjury that the signature on this document is a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. She pulled out a second document. Furthermore, we have sworn affidavits from airline and credit card companies proving that my client, Mrs. Aria Caldwell, was in New York City on the day these papers were allegedly signed in Las Vegas. She has, in fact, never been to the state of Nevada in her entire life. A collective gasp swept through the church. The whispers turned into a roar of scandal. Bigamy, forgery, fraud. Jessica turned her attention directly to Nate, whose carefully constructed composure had completely shattered. Which means, Mr. Caldwell, that your divorce is a legal fiction. You are and have been for the past 12 years married to Aria Caldwell. Her gaze flicked over to the stunned, pale-faced Brooke. Making this ceremony an attempt to commit a felony, specifically bigamy. Brooke looked at Nate, her eyes wide with horror and betrayal. Nate, is this true? Tell me it's not true. Nate stammered, his eyes darting around for an escape route, but he was trapped by the altar, the priest and 1,000 pairs of staring eyes. It's a misunderstanding, a clerical error. Aria, you're lying. Aria let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. Lying, Nate, I haven't even gotten to the interesting part yet. That was the cue. Ben, the tech specialist from the legal team, discreetly handed a tablet to one of the reporters from the Wall Street Journal, who was sitting in the 5th pew, looking on with rapt attention. On the screen was a scanned high-resolution image of a certain cocktail napkin covered in diagrams. Jessica Sloan wasn't finished. The fraudulent divorce was just the appetizer, she announced, her voice ringing with theatrical flair. It's time for the main course. The unraveling of Nathaniel Caldwell had only just begun. The revelation of the fake divorce had thrown the cathedral into chaos. Guests were on their feet, murmuring in shocked tones, their smartphones held up to record the unbelievable scene. Brooke Langford had backed away from Nate, her white dress now looking like a funeral shroud. Her father Robert was staring at Nate with an expression of pure, murderous rage. He now understood the dossier he'd received. It wasn't just about embezzlement, it was about a foundation of lies. The interesting part, Nate spat, a cornered animal lashing out. You left me. You were happy to take my money while living in that big empty house contributing nothing? This was the moment Aria had waited for. The moment he would try to paint her as a freeloader. A ghost he had rightfully exorcised. She took a step forward, her crimson dress flowing around her. Contributed nothing, she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Let's talk about my contributions, shall we? She looked past him to the press, to the assembled captains of industry. Everyone here knows Nathaniel Caldwell as the genius behind Innovate Dynamics, the man who created the revolutionary dynamic flow logistics algorithm that made the company billions. She paused, letting his reputation fill the space. It's a wonderful story, inspiring. The only problem is that it's a lie. Jessica Sloan stepped forward again. On the night of October 14th, 7 years ago, my client, Aria Caldwell, conceptualized the core framework for that very algorithm. She diagrammed it on a cocktail napkin at a restaurant called La Stella as an anniversary gift for her husband. Gavin, the COO, laughed out loud. That's insane. A cocktail napkin. That's your proof. This cocktail napkin, Ben, the tech lawyer, called out from the aisle. He held up his tablet, displaying the crisp image of the napkin for all to see. The image was simultaneously being projected onto a discreetly placed screen near the altar, set up by their advance team. The date the diagram's Aria's handwriting it was all there. Preserved by a sentimental restaurant owner. We have the original in a secure lockup, and it has already been authenticated. Aria continued, her voice resonating with 12 years of suppressed truth. He took my idea, my intellectual property, and he built his empire on it. He told me it was our success, but my name is on none of the patents. My name is on none of the corporate charters. He gave me a beautiful cage and an allowance, and in exchange, he stole my soul's work. The final blow came from Jessica, and not only did Mr. Caldwell steal his wife's intellectual property, she declared, her voice booming like a gavel. He then used the profits from that theft to defraud his own company. We have uncovered a network of offshore accounts where Mr. Caldwell has siphoned over $90 million from Innovate Dynamics over the last 3 years. Funds that should have gone to shareholders. Shareholders like... She paused for dramatic effect. Mr. Robert Langford. All eyes snapped to Robert. The pieces clicked together in his mind with horrifying clarity. The dossier. The fraud. Nate hadn't been marrying his daughter to join his family. He'd been planning to fleece him and use the merger to hide his crimes. He was a viper they had welcomed into their nest. Robert Langford took a slow, deliberate step into the aisle. His face was purple with fury. He didn't look at his daughter. He looked only at Nate. "Caldwell," he roared, his voice shaking the stained glass windows. "You are finished. The merger is off. My legal team will be in touch. You will be buried in so much litigation you'll forget what the sun looks like." He then turned to his sobbing daughter. "Brooke, we're leaving." He strode towards her, took her arm and began to pull her away from the altar, away from the ruins of her wedding day. Brooke, however, had one last thing to say. She wrenched her arm free, walked right up to Nate, and slapped him hard across the face, the sound cracking through the cathedral like a gunshot. "You pathetic lying worm," she hissed, before turning and storming down the aisle with her father. Nate stood alone at the altar, a pathetic figure in a sea of his own making. His bride was gone. His father-in-law was now his mortal enemy. His business was about to be torn apart. The reporters were snapping photos, their flashes like lightning strikes, illuminating his downfall. He looked at Aria, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hatred. You ruined me," he whispered. Aria met his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself a small, cold, triumphant smile. "No, Nate," she said, her voice clear for all to hear. "I didn't ruin you. I just handed you the bill for the last 12 years. It seems you can't afford it." With that, she turned her back on him. She did not run. She did not gloat. She simply walked with the unshakable poise of a woman who had just razed an empire of lies to the ground and was ready to build her own on the ashes. Jessica Sloan and her team fell into formation, behind her, a phalanx of justice, as they exited the cathedral, leaving Nathaniel Caldwell to be consumed by the wreckage of his life. The aftermath was a media firestorm. The story of the jilted bride in the red dress who dismantled her husband's life at the altar was irresistible. The wedding crash, they called it. Caldwell's cathedral cataclysm. Nathaniel Caldwell became a pariah overnight. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Faced with irrefutable evidence of bigamy, forgery, and wire fraud, Nate's lawyers advised him to settle. But they weren't negotiating with a heartbroken wife seeking alimony. They were negotiating with Jessica Sloan and the full might of Pierce Holdings. The terms of the settlement were not a negotiation. They were a surrender. Aria, as the legal co-creator of the dynamic flow algorithm, was awarded a 50% stake in Innovate Dynamics. Given Nate's massive embezzlement, the court-appointed arbitrator awarded her an additional 25% of his shares as punitive damages. In one fell swoop, Aria Caldwell became the 75% majority shareholder of the company, built on her stolen dream. Nate was wiped out. Robert Langford's lawsuits bled him dry of his remaining personal assets. The SEC launched an investigation into his financial crimes, and criminal charges were imminent. Gavin, his COO and best man, turned state's evidence against him in exchange for a lighter sentence. Within 6 months, Nathaniel Caldwell went from tech mogul to a disgraced felon awaiting trial. But this story was no longer about him. It was about Aria. She didn't retreat back into her quiet, suburban life. Guided by Desmond Pierce, she stepped into her new role with a ferocity and intelligence that stunned the business world. She moved out of the house, filled with bad memories, and into a penthouse of her own, one she paid for with her own name. She replaced Nate's sycophantic board members with brilliant, innovative minds. Her first act as CEO of Innovate Dynamics was to issue a public apology for the fraudulent practices of her predecessor and set up a fund to repay the shareholders Nate had cheated. Her second was to establish the Aria Caldwell Foundation, dedicated to supporting women entrepreneurs whose ideas had been dismissed or stolen. She was a natural. The 12 years she had spent observing, analyzing, and strategizing from the shadows had prepared her perfectly. She was decisive, fair, and visionary. Under her leadership, the company's stock, after an initial plunge, stabilized and then began to climb to unprecedented heights. They stopped calling her Nate Caldwell's ex-wife and started calling her the Empress of Tech. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after the wedding, Aria stood in her office, the one that used to be Nate's, looking out at the city. The view was the same, but the world was entirely different. Desmond Pierce was with her, leaning on a silver-handled cane. "I saw the news this morning," he said, a proud glint in his eye. "Innovate Dynamics just secured the largest government logistics contract in a decade. Congratulations, Madam CEO." Aria smiled, a genuine warm smile. "Thank you, Desmond, for everything, for seeing something in me when I couldn't even see it myself." "Nonsense," he grumbled, though his expression was soft. "I just opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it wearing red." Her phone buzzed. It was a notification from a news alert. Nathaniel Caldwell had just been sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. She felt a brief, fleeting flicker of something, not pity, not joy, just a quiet sense of closure. He was a chapter, and that book was now closed. She looked away from the window, back at the bustling office, at the plans for a new software launch spread across her desk, at the future she was building. The beige and grey were gone forever. Her world was now a vibrant canvas of bold colours, a masterpiece she was painting herself. She had walked into that church to reclaim her past, but she had walked out with something infinitely more valuable, her future. 2 years passed. The name Nathaniel Caldwell had faded from the headlines, becoming a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. In his place, the name Aria Caldwell was spoken with a mixture of awe and intimidation. She had not just saved Innovate Dynamics, she had transformed it. Under her leadership, the company became a pioneer in ethical AI and sustainable tech, its stock value tripling. She was no longer a story of revenge. She was a powerhouse, the undisputed Empress of Tech. The crimson dress was retired, replaced by a wardrobe of bespoke power suits in shades of sapphire charcoal and onyx. The fire had not been extinguished. It had been forged into steel. Peace, however, was a different kind of acquisition. One afternoon, a letter arrived at her private office, bypassing her executive assistants. The postmark was from a federal correctional institution. Her breath caught in her throat. It was from Nate. She expected a plea, a threat, or a demand. It was none of those things. The letter, written in his familiar, elegant script, was unnervingly reflective. He wrote about their first tiny apartment, about the cheap wine they used to drink, while dreaming up impossible futures on their living room floor. He talked about the algorithm, not as a property he had stolen, but as a dream she had shared with him. I see now that the money was the poison he wrote. It didn't change me, it just amplified the worst parts of what was already there. I built a kingdom on a lie, and it turned to dust as it should have. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just hope for your own sake that the crown is not as heavy for you as it was for me. The letter unsettled her profoundly. Was it a genuine epiphany, born of lonely reflection, or the calculated first move of a master manipulator? Planting a seed, she filed it away, but the words lingered in the back of her mind. A month later, at the World Economic Forum in Davos, she had another encounter with the past. Across a crowded atrium, she locked eyes with Brooke Langford. The 2 years had etched new lines on Brooke's face. The youthful glow was gone, replaced by a polished, cynical hardness. She was now a vice president for her father's European operations. Cornered near the coffee station, the two women shared a moment of frigid silence. "Caldwell," Brooke said, her voice clipped. "You've done well for yourself. I suppose I should thank you. My father says the misery of my failed wedding was the best business education I could have asked for." "I'm sorry for how things happened, Brooke." Arya said the words, feeling surprisingly genuine. "You were collateral damage in a war you didn't start." Brooke let out a short, bitter laugh. "Don't be sorry. Be careful. You won the battle against Nate, but you made the mistake of showing my father just how valuable your company is." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You took the king, but you kept the castle. My father is a man who believes every castle should belong to him. He doesn't like loose ends." The veiled warning became a clear and present danger 3 weeks later. Ben, now her trusted chief technology officer, came into her office, his face grim. "We have a problem," he said, pulling up a series of charts on her monitor. "A hostile entity is buying up our stock, quietly through a dozen shell corporations. They're trying to mask their identity, but the money trail is deep. It feels like Langford." Desmond Pierce confirmed it that evening over a game of chess in his library. "Robert Langford sees you not as an ally, but as an asset he failed to acquire through marriage," the old billionaire explained, moving his rook into a threatening position. "He helped you expose Nate because Nate was a liability, but a thriving Innovate Dynamics under the control of a brilliant but independent CEO that to him is a target. He will wage a proxy war. He will bleed you on Wall Street until you are forced to sell to him." Arya looked at the chessboard. She was in check. A public corporate war would be bloody and could destabilize the company she had worked so hard to rebuild. She could fight him head-on, but Langford had deeper pockets and decades of experience in this brutal game. She needed a different kind of weapon. She needed an advantage that wasn't about money. She needed a secret. Nate's letter flashed in her mind. "I built a kingdom on a lie. Who would know the cracks in Robert Langford's own kingdom better than the man who had almost married into it?" Jessica Arya said into her phone, an hour later, the decision hardening her voice. "I need you to arrange a visit for me. To the Allenwood Federal Correctional Institution. I need to speak with my husband." The final scene was one of surreal, quiet intensity. Arya walked down the long, sterile hallway of the prison, the clicks of her heels echoing in the silence. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, the color of deep water and strategy. A guard unlocked a heavy door, leading her into a small, featureless room. Nathaniel Caldwell sat waiting at a simple metal table. He was thinner, and the expensive haircut was gone, but the intelligence in his eyes burned as brightly as ever. He looked up as she entered, and a slow, complex smile, not of triumph, but of understanding, spread across his face. "Aria," he said, his voice raspy but clear. "I was wondering when you'd come." He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "I assume you're not here to reminisce about our anniversary. You're here because of Robert Langford." He leaned forward, the old familiar spark of a strategist entering his gaze. "So," he said, "let's talk. Aria's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the strength that can be forged in the fires of betrayal. It's about reclaiming not just what was stolen from you, but who you were meant to be all along. She was pushed into the shadows, deemed invisible and erased. But she refused to be a footnote in her own life story. Instead, she became the author of a brand new, brilliant chapter. This story reminds us that sometimes the most devastating endings are actually the beginning of our greatest victories. What would you have done in Aria's shoes? Do you believe justice was fully served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Aria's incredible journey from a forgotten wife to a powerful empress, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear a story of strength, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Click the notification bell so you never miss an update.